The most dangerous abuse of power is the one that believes nobody is watching. Those words echoed silently through the federal courtroom as every eye settled on the enormous display waiting to illuminate the front wall. The room carried the unmistakable weight of history in the making. Reporters lined the back rows with notebooks resting on their knees instead of cameras in their hands because recording devices had been prohibited. Federal marshals stood quietly along the walls, their expressions unreadable. Attorneys whispered final observations before falling silent as the courtroom doors closed with a heavy click. At the center of the room sat federal judge Marcus Ellison, dressed in a dark charcoal suit rather than judicial robes, his hands folded calmly on the polished oak table before him. His face revealed neither anger nor satisfaction. Instead, it reflected the quiet confidence of a man who had spent an entire career believing that facts would always outlast assumptions. Across the aisle sat Officer Ryan Mercer, a veteran police officer whose spotless uniform appeared as carefully prepared as it had been on every shift during the past 2 decades. He avoided looking toward Marcus, choosing instead to focus on the blank screen mounted above the witness stand. Only 24 hours earlier, Ryan had spoken with complete certainty. He had warned Marcus that illegal actions carried serious consequences and that prison would soon become his new reality. Today, however, the atmosphere had changed in ways that no one inside the courtroom could ignore. The hearing had not been called to revisit rumors or public opinion. It had been convened to examine evidence that had only recently surfaced through multiple independent investigative channels. The difference mattered. Outside the courthouse, television stations had spent the morning replaying dramatic headlines that divided public opinion across the country. Some believed the respected federal judge had attempted to hide behind his title. Others questioned whether the arrest itself had crossed legal boundaries. Social media had transformed fragments of information into thousands of competing narratives, each one claiming certainty without possessing the complete story. Inside the courtroom, none of that mattered anymore. Here, speculation held no authority. Only evidence would speak. Internal affairs investigators occupied one side of the gallery, while representatives from the Federal Bureau of Investigation quietly reviewed sealed binders filled with certified documentation. Several senior judges attended as observers, understanding that the outcome could influence public confidence far beyond a single courtroom. The silence became almost tangible when the courtroom clerk announced that all parties were present and ready to proceed. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered from the private chambers and took her place behind the elevated bench. Her measured expression revealed nothing about the evidence waiting inside the sealed case positioned beside the clerk. She surveyed the courtroom before speaking in an even voice. These proceedings concern the legality of an arrest conducted yesterday afternoon and the evidence subsequently obtained during the independent investigation. Every decision rendered today will be based exclusively upon authenticated facts. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Marcus remained composed, his attention fixed upon the bench. Ryan adjusted the sleeve of his uniform with controlled precision, convincing himself that official reports, witness statements, and procedure would protect him exactly as they always had. He had worn the badge long enough to believe experience could answer every accusation. What he did not know was that the truth had already begun assembling itself long before anyone realized a mistake had been made. As the clerk unlocked the sealed evidence case and carefully connected a secure digital drive to the courtroom presentation system, the large display flickered to life. Judge Whitmore glanced toward both parties before giving one simple instruction that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. Play the recording. 24 hours earlier, the city moved with the ordinary rhythm of another weekday as thousands of commuters crossed downtown streets beneath the rising morning sun. Inside the United States Federal Courthouse, Judge Marcus Ellison concluded the final hearing on a complex financial fraud case that had occupied months of careful preparation. The attorneys gathered their files, the courtroom deputy organized the official record, and the gallery slowly emptied while Marcus remained seated for another moment, quietly reviewing his notes before signing the final order. Those who worked beside him respected him not because he demanded authority, but because he listened before speaking and measured every decision against the law rather than emotion. Outside the courtroom, young law clerks greeted him with warm smiles, and veteran marshals nodded with quiet admiration. Marcus answered each greeting with the same calm courtesy that had defined his career for years. He never mentioned his title outside the courthouse unless duty required it. To most people walking through the city that afternoon, he appeared to be nothing more than another professional leaving work after a long day. A few blocks away, Officer Ryan Mercer began the final hours of his patrol shift. With more than 20 years in uniform, Ryan carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed experience answered every question before it could even be asked. Fellow officers trusted his instincts, supervisors appreciated his productivity, and younger patrol officers often watched him as an example of decisive policing. Ryan accepted those quiet signs of respect as confirmation that his judgment rarely failed. During roll call earlier that morning, he had reminded several rookies that hesitation created danger while confidence maintained control. Those words stayed with him as he drove through the afternoon traffic, scanning every intersection with practiced attention. The city reflected itself across the windshield of his patrol vehicle while dispatch calls came and went through the radio without urgency. Meanwhile, Marcus changed from his judicial robe into a charcoal business suit inside his private chambers before leaving through the employee entrance carrying only a leather briefcase filled with legal documents that he intended to review later that evening. His official vehicle remained in the courthouse garage for maintenance, so he drove his personal sedan, something he preferred whenever possible because it allowed him to move through the city without unnecessary attention. He appreciated ordinary routines. They reminded him that every public servant, regardless of title, remained part of the same community they had sworn to protect. As Marcus entered the downtown streets, he noticed families leaving restaurants, office workers walking toward parking garages, and tourists stopping to photograph historic buildings under the warm afternoon light. Nothing suggested that the next several minutes would alter countless lives. At nearly the same time, Ryan received a routine dispatch advising officers to remain alert following reports of suspicious activity involving an unidentified dark sedan seen several neighborhoods away. The description provided over the radio lacked specific identifying information and did not include a license plate or verified suspect. Ryan acknowledged the broadcast and continued driving. A few minutes later, while waiting at a traffic signal, he noticed Marcus's dark sedan crossing the intersection. From his position, the vehicle loosely matched portions of the general description. Instead of requesting additional verification, Ryan made a decision based upon his own assumptions. He activated his patrol lights and pulled behind the sedan as Marcus calmly guided his vehicle toward the curb, unaware that an ordinary drive home had just become the beginning of a story that would soon challenge careers, reputations, and the very meaning of justice itself. Marcus Ellison lowered his driver's side window before the officer reached the sedan, keeping both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel exactly as countless public safety announcements advised. The late afternoon traffic continued flowing around them, while pedestrians glanced briefly toward the patrol vehicle before continuing along the sidewalk. Officer Ryan Mercer approached with measured confidence, one hand resting near his duty belt as years of routine experience guided every movement. His expression remained firm from the very first moment. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," he said without greeting. Marcus nodded politely, retrieved the requested documents, and handed them through the open window. Ryan examined the driver's license for several seconds before looking back at Marcus with narrowed eyes. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "From work downtown," Marcus answered evenly. "And where exactly do you work?" Ryan continued. Marcus paused briefly before replying. "At the federal courthouse." Ryan glanced once more at the identification before handing it back halfway, then stopping himself. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus remained composed. "Officer, may I ask why?" Ryan's voice immediately hardened. "Because I am giving you a lawful order." Without argument, Marcus slowly opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. Several people waiting at a nearby crosswalk noticed the encounter and quietly watched from a distance. Ryan informed dispatch that he was conducting an investigative stop involving a vehicle matching a general description from an earlier broadcast. The dispatcher acknowledged the transmission, but did not provide any additional identifying information. Marcus listened carefully. He understood enough about constitutional law to recognize that a vague vehicle description alone rarely justified what appeared to be an escalating detention. Still, he chose cooperation over confrontation. "Do you consent to a search of your vehicle?" Ryan asked. Marcus answered calmly, "Officer, I do not consent to any search. However, I will comply with every lawful instruction you give." Ryan studied him for a long moment before saying, "You people always think you know the law." The words hung in the air, quiet enough that only Marcus heard them clearly. Marcus met the officer's gaze without raising his voice. Knowing the law protects everyone, including law enforcement, Ryan took a single step closer. Not today. Instead of requesting a warrant or waiting for additional supervisory guidance, Ryan instructed Marcus to move toward the front of the patrol vehicle. A second patrol unit arrived moments later after Ryan requested routine backup. The younger officer who stepped out remained several feet away, observing without participating while traffic continued passing through the busy intersection. Ryan opened the driver's door of the sedan and began looking through the passenger compartment, despite Marcus's repeated statement that he did not consent. The search produced nothing unusual. Yet Ryan refused to end the encounter. He closed the door, walked back toward Marcus, and announced that the investigation had expanded because he believed Marcus was interfering with a lawful police investigation. The younger officer looked uncertain but remained silent. Marcus spoke with the same steady tone he had used since the stop began. "Officer, I have complied with every instruction you have given." Ryan ignored the statement. "You are under arrest." Several bystanders stopped walking altogether as Ryan continued, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "If you think your education or your job will save you, you are mistaken. You're looking at serious prison time." Marcus neither resisted nor argued. He simply looked directly at Ryan and answered with remarkable restraint. "The law will decide that, officer, not assumptions." Neither man realized that cameras positioned high above the intersection had quietly recorded every passing second. Within an hour, the encounter had already begun taking on a life of its own. A passerby had recorded only the final moments from across the street, capturing Marcus Ellison standing beside the patrol vehicle while Officer Ryan Mercer spoke confidently about the consequences of the arrest. The short clip contained no context, no beginning, and no explanation. Yet it spread across local newsrooms and social media faster than anyone inside the police department could have anticipated. Headlines questioned why a respected professional had been taken into custody, while others praised the officer for supposedly refusing to give special treatment. Every incomplete version of the story fueled another wave of speculation. Inside the precinct, Ryan completed his incident report with the certainty of someone convinced that procedure alone would protect every decision he had made. He described the stop as a lawful escalation, based upon suspicious circumstances, and documented that Marcus had been uncooperative in subtle ways that could not easily be measured. The language sounded official, polished, and persuasive. Supervisors reviewing the initial paperwork found nothing immediately alarming because they had not yet seen anything beyond the written report. Experience often encouraged confidence in documentation, especially when prepared by a veteran officer with an otherwise respected record. Meanwhile, Marcus remained remarkably composed. During routine processing, he answered every question clearly, requested nothing beyond the opportunity to contact legal counsel, and never mentioned the position he held within the federal judiciary. The booking personnel recognized him only as another individual moving through an ordinary administrative process. One young employee quietly remarked that Marcus seemed unusually calm for someone facing serious accusations. Marcus simply replied, "Emotions pass. Facts remain." Those 4 words lingered in the employee's mind long after the conversation ended. At the federal courthouse, concern spread quickly when staff members realized Judge Ellison had failed to return several scheduled calls and had unexpectedly missed a confidential administrative meeting. His longtime judicial assistant, Emily Harper, attempted to reach his cellular phone several times before receiving notice that he had been detained by local authorities. Shock swept through the chambers. Senior court officials immediately began confirming basic information instead of reacting to rumors, understanding that every decision required accuracy rather than assumption. Even then, Marcus instructed everyone through his attorney to remain respectful toward the local department and to avoid making public statements before the complete record became available. He believed that the legal system demanded patience even when patience felt unfair. As evening settled over the city, television panels debated the arrest without access to the evidence that actually mattered. Commentators repeated fragments of witness accounts while online discussions transformed uncertainty into absolute conclusions. Some insisted the officer must have uncovered something significant. Others argued that the detention itself seemed unusually aggressive. Almost no one recognized how much important information remained unseen. High above the intersection where everything had begun, traffic cameras continued storing digital footage according to their normal retention schedule. Inside Ryan's patrol vehicle, electronic location data quietly recorded every movement made during the stop. Dispatch servers preserved each radio transmission with precise time stamps measured down to the second. Nearby businesses maintained their exterior security recordings exactly as they did every day, unaware that ordinary surveillance systems had become silent witnesses. None of those devices cared about reputation, emotion, or public opinion. They simply preserved the truth exactly as it happened, waiting for the moment when someone would finally think to ask the right questions. The following morning began not with accusations but with questions. Inside the Office of Professional Standards, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell reviewed the initial arrest report while comparing it against the automatic records generated by the department's own computer systems. At first glance, everything appeared routine. The incident report contained the expected sequence of events. The dispatch log reflected the traffic stop, and the booking records matched the reported timeline. Yet years of investigative experience had taught Sarah that the smallest inconsistency often pointed toward a much larger truth. One detail immediately caught her attention. Ryan Mercer had documented that the investigative detention expanded because of observations made after approaching the vehicle, but the radio log showed that he had requested backup only seconds after activating his emergency lights. The timing suggested that an important decision had been made before any meaningful conversation could have taken place. Rather than drawing conclusions, Sarah requested every available source of electronic evidence connected to the incident. Within hours, technicians began collecting traffic camera footage from nearby intersections, automated location records from the patrol vehicle, dispatch audio preserved by the communications center, and exterior security recordings from businesses overlooking the street where the stop had occurred. At the federal courthouse, Chief Judge Rebecca Lawson quietly authorized full cooperation with the investigation while making it clear that no one should seek special treatment because one of their own had been involved. She reminded every member of the court that public confidence depended upon transparency rather than influence. Marcus Ellison agreed completely. Through his attorney, he declined every opportunity to make public comments, insisting that evidence should speak before emotion ever entered the conversation. His restraint surprised many people who expected frustration or public criticism. Instead, he continued placing his trust in the legal process he had dedicated his career to protecting. Meanwhile, Ryan returned to normal patrol duties, believing the situation would soon disappear beneath the constant flow of new cases. Fellow officers offered supportive remarks in passing, assuring him that controversial arrests often attracted temporary media attention before fading from public memory. Ryan accepted those reassurances without hesitation. He remained convinced that his report accurately reflected the encounter and that nothing within the investigation could seriously challenge his professional judgment. Late that afternoon, the first collection of digital evidence arrived at the investigative office. Analysts synchronized every recording according to verified timestamps generated independently by each system. They enlarged video images, compared dispatch transmissions against vehicle movements, and created a second-by-second timeline that no witness memory could equal. As each source aligned with the next, the reconstruction became remarkably precise. Cameras positioned several hundred feet apart captured the same patrol vehicle from different angles. The electronic location history confirmed exactly where it had stopped, when every door opened, and how long the encounter lasted. Dispatch recordings preserved every word, transmitted over the radio without omission or interpretation. None of those records possessed opinions, assumptions, or personal motivations. They simply documented reality with quiet precision. Then one analyst noticed something unexpected while reviewing footage from municipal traffic camera mounted above the intersection. The recording captured the patrol vehicle long before the emergency lights activated, revealing several crucial moments that had never been mentioned in the written report. Sarah leaned closer to the monitor as technicians requested higher resolution copies from the city's archive. Around the room, conversations gradually stopped. Nobody announced that they had found the answer. Experienced investigators understood that careful verification always came before certainty. Even so, everyone present recognized the same unmistakable feeling. The silent witnesses that Marcus had trusted from the very beginning were finally beginning to tell their story. By the second day of the investigation, every piece of digital evidence had been copied, authenticated, and arranged along a detailed timeline that stretched across an entire conference room wall. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell insisted that no conclusion would be reached until every second could be supported by at least 2 independent sources. The process was slow, methodical, and deliberately free from assumptions. Investigators compared the dispatch recordings with the automatic location history from Ryan Mercer's patrol vehicle, then matched both against municipal traffic cameras and privately owned security systems positioned along the same block. Every source carried its own encrypted timestamp, making it nearly impossible for one record to contradict another without immediately revealing the discrepancy. As the synchronized recordings played across multiple monitors, the first significant inconsistency became impossible to ignore. Ryan had written that he developed reasonable suspicion only after approaching Marcus Ellison's vehicle and observing additional circumstances during their conversation. The electronic records, however, painted a different sequence. The patrol vehicle's computer showed that Ryan requested backup almost immediately after activating his emergency lights, before he had reached the driver's window or exchanged more than a few words. Sarah replayed the timing several times, hoping there was an explanation that had simply been overlooked. There was none. The evidence consistently demonstrated that important decisions had been made before the encounter unfolded, as described in the report. Another investigator isolated the dispatch audio while comparing it with the surveillance footage captured from above the intersection. The recordings confirmed that dispatch never identified a specific license plate, never verified the driver's identity, and never instructed officers to detain the particular vehicle Marcus had been driving. The original broadcast described only a general vehicle type observed in another neighborhood several miles away. Standing quietly behind the analysts, an assistant attorney assigned to advise the investigation took careful notes without interrupting. The growing pattern suggested that the written narrative no longer aligned with the objective evidence preserved by independent systems. Sarah then requested footage from a nearby office building whose exterior cameras overlooked the traffic stop from a different angle than the city's equipment. When the higher resolution recording appeared on the screen, the room became noticeably quieter. The video clearly showed Marcus bringing his vehicle safely to the curb almost immediately after the emergency lights activated. It showed him remaining inside until instructed to step out, keeping his movements measured and cooperative throughout the encounter. There was no visible indication of hurried actions, evasive behavior, or anything resembling the escalating concerns described in Ryan's report. Every camera captured the same calm sequence from different perspectives. The investigators continued verifying each observation instead of rushing toward judgment. They enlarged frames, confirmed time codes, and documented every finding according to departmental policy. By late afternoon, Sarah authorized formal interviews with the officers involved. Ryan arrived, confident that the meeting would simply confirm what he had already reported. He answered questions with the same certainty reflected in his paperwork, unaware that investigators had already compared every statement against hours of authenticated digital evidence. Across the table, Sarah asked him to explain the precise moment when his suspicion changed from a routine traffic stop into an investigative detention. Ryan described the sequence exactly as he had written it. Without raising her voice or revealing emotion, Sarah turned one monitor toward him. The screen displayed synchronized timestamps from the patrol vehicle, dispatch center, and multiple cameras, all advancing together second by second. For the first time since the arrest, Ryan's confidence faltered. He realized that memory could be challenged, opinions could be debated, and reports could be questioned, but a timeline built from independent evidence possessed a quiet authority that neither rank nor experience could overcome. The courtroom remained so quiet that the faint sound of the presentation system could be heard as the first authenticated recording appeared on the large display. Every person inside the room understood that opinions had reached their limit. From this moment forward, only evidence would matter. Judge Eleanor Whitmore instructed the clerk to confirm that every video file, dispatch recording, and electronic record had been authenticated through the established chain of custody before being admitted into the record. Once the verification was complete, the presentation began. The first video showed the intersection from the city's elevated traffic camera. Vehicles moved through the afternoon light with ordinary precision until Ryan Mercer's patrol vehicle entered the frame. The recording continued without interruption, capturing the exact moment the emergency lights activated behind Marcus Ellison's sedan. A digital clock remained visible in the corner of the screen, measuring every second with absolute consistency. The next display synchronized the traffic footage with the automatic location records generated by the patrol vehicle. Every movement matched perfectly. Then the dispatch audio began to play. The jury of observers listened carefully as the original radio transmission described only a general vehicle type reported several miles away. No license plate had ever been provided. No driver had ever been identified. No instruction had been issued directing officers to stop Marcus's vehicle. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell quietly explained how independent analysts had synchronized each recording using encrypted timestamps from multiple agencies, allowing investigators to reconstruct the encounter second by second without relying upon memory or personal interpretation. The courtroom watched as the timeline continued. Marcus's vehicle pulled safely to the curb within moments of the emergency lights appearing. Another camera angle from a nearby office building confirmed that Marcus remained inside until instructed to exit. The footage showed him handing over his documents without hesitation, responding calmly, and complying with every instruction that followed. No recording revealed behavior consistent with the escalating concerns described in Ryan's written report. Judge Whitmore then directed attention toward the dispatch log displayed beside the video. The official record showed that Ryan had requested backup almost immediately after initiating the stop, well before any meaningful conversation could have occurred at the driver's window. The sequence contradicted the explanation documented in the incident report. Ryan's attorney requested permission to clarify the apparent discrepancy, but before any statement could be made, another synchronized recording appeared on the screen. This time, the patrol vehicle's internal computer log confirmed the exact second every action had been entered into the system. The timing aligned perfectly with the traffic cameras and dispatch records, leaving no meaningful conflict among the electronic sources. Ryan looked toward the monitor without speaking. The confidence that had once defined his posture gradually gave way to quiet disbelief. Across the room, Marcus remained exactly as he had been throughout the proceedings, sitting upright with his hands folded together, showing neither satisfaction nor resentment. He understood that the evidence required no celebration because the truth had finally been allowed to speak for itself. After reviewing the complete presentation, Judge Whitmore paused before addressing the courtroom. She explained that public trust depended upon the equal application of the law and that every public servant, regardless of position or authority, remained accountable to the same constitutional standards. She further stated that objective evidence carried greater weight than assumption, speculation, or unsupported conclusions. As her words settled across the silent courtroom, it became unmistakably clear that this hearing had never been about preserving reputations. It had always been about determining whether power had been exercised within the limits of the law, and after every authenticated recording had been carefully examined, the answer no longer depended upon anyone's opinion. The decision arrived without raised voices or dramatic celebration. When the hearing concluded, Judge Eleanor Whitmore announced that the evidence presented established substantial inconsistencies between the documented justification for the detention and the independently verified electronic record. She ordered that every allegation against Marcus Ellison arising from the incident be dismissed and directed that the complete investigative file be forwarded to the appropriate authorities for further administrative and legal review. The words were delivered calmly, yet their impact reached far beyond the courtroom walls. Reporters hurried from a gallery to update their organizations. News alerts appeared across the country within minutes, replacing speculation with carefully verified facts. The same networks that had questioned Marcus only a day earlier now explained how synchronized digital evidence had overturned the original narrative. Outside the courthouse, cameras gathered beneath the courthouse steps, waiting for statements that many expected would be filled with anger or triumph. Instead, Marcus quietly exited through a side entrance accompanied by his attorney and several federal marshals. When a reporter asked whether he felt vindicated, he paused briefly before answering. Justice is never about winning against another person. It is about making certain the truth is given the opportunity to stand on its own. He declined every additional question and returned to his chambers without another public comment. Across town, Ryan Mercer sat inside an administrative conference room where the atmosphere felt very different from the confidence he had carried only 2 days earlier. Department leaders informed him that he was being placed on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of formal disciplinary proceedings. His badge, department-issued equipment, and patrol vehicle were collected according to established policy. Nobody spoke with anger. Nobody attempted to humiliate him. Every step followed the same procedures that governed every employee regardless of rank or years of service. As Ryan signed the required paperwork, he looked toward the empty space where his badge had rested only moments before. For the first time in his career, he fully understood how quickly authority could disappear when separated from accountability. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell completed her final investigative memorandum with the same discipline that had guided every stage of the inquiry. Her report avoided emotional language and personal opinions. It relied exclusively upon authenticated evidence, verified timelines, and documented inconsistencies. She understood that the credibility of an investigation depended not upon dramatic conclusions, but upon careful facts that could withstand independent review. Within the police department, supervisors announced additional training focused on constitutional policing, evidence-based decision-making, and the importance of documenting encounters accurately from beginning to end. Younger officers quietly discussed the investigation among themselves, recognizing that experience alone could never replace professional judgment rooted in fairness. At the federal courthouse, colleagues welcomed Marcus back with quiet respect rather than applause. He thanked each person for their professionalism and returned to reviewing case files waiting on his desk. The interruption had not changed. His commitment to the law. If anything, it strengthened his belief that public confidence depended upon institutions willing to examine themselves honestly when mistakes occurred. As evening settled across the city once again, the headlines gradually shifted from conflict to accountability. One career had entered an uncertain future, while another reputation had been fully restored, not because powerful people had intervened, but because ordinary cameras, accurate records, and patient investigators had refused to forget what truly happened. In the end, the loudest voice in the entire case had never belonged to any witness inside the courtroom. It belonged to the quiet certainty of evidence that had been waiting all along for someone willing to listen. Several months later, the memory of that afternoon no longer dominated the headlines, yet its lessons continued shaping quiet conversations inside courtrooms, police academies, and legal classrooms across the country. New training programs emphasized that authority earned public trust only when it remained accountable to the Constitution, and investigators frequently referenced the case as an example of why objective evidence must always outweigh personal assumptions. The city itself had returned to its familiar rhythm. Traffic filled the streets each morning, courthouse doors opened before sunrise, and patrol vehicles continued their daily routes. Life moved forward. But it moved forward carrying a clearer understanding that even the smallest decision made under the color of authority could leave consequences far beyond a single moment. Inside the federal courthouse, Judge Marcus Ellison walked through the marble hallway with the same measured pace that had defined his career long before the incident. Clerks greeted him warmly, attorneys prepared for another day of hearings, and members of the public quietly waited for their cases to be called. Nothing about his routine suggested someone seeking recognition or sympathy. He simply returned to the work he believed mattered most. As he entered his courtroom, he paused for a brief moment beneath the engraved words displayed above the bench, reminding every person who entered that equal justice under law was not merely an aspiration, but a responsibility shared by every public servant. Taking his seat, Marcus looked across the courtroom at people from different neighborhoods, professions, and backgrounds, each carrying their own hopes, fears, and expectations. He understood more deeply than ever that justice was never measured by how it treated the powerful. It was measured by how faithfully it protected every individual when no one expected the truth to prevail. Across the city, the disciplinary process involving Ryan Mercer reached its conclusion according to established legal and administrative procedures. His law enforcement career officially came to an end, not because public opinion demanded it, but because the evidence demonstrated that professional responsibilities had not been carried out within the standards required of the badge he once wore. There were no celebrations surrounding that outcome. Many officers recognized it as a difficult reminder that public confidence depended upon accountability as much as courage. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell later addressed a class of newly hired officers, holding up no photographs and mentioning no names. Instead, she offered a simple lesson. Technology records actions. Reports explain actions. Character determines actions. Make certain those three things always agree. The room remained silent as every recruit considered the weight of those words. Marcus never spoke publicly about Ryan again. He carried no interest in revenge, because revenge could never strengthen the legal system he had spent decades serving. What mattered to him was that the institutions involved had been willing to examine the evidence honestly, correct their mistakes, and reaffirm that no title, no uniform, and no position placed anyone above the law. As the courthouse clock marked another ordinary afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall courtroom windows, illuminating the bench where Marcus prepared to hear the next case with the same fairness he had always promised every person who stood before him. The previous months had proven something that could never be measured by headlines or public applause. Power may influence a moment, assumptions may shape a narrative, and authority may command attention. But truth possesses a remarkable patience. It does not rush. It does not argue. It simply waits for the day when every voice grows quiet enough for justice to hear it. And on that day, the law always finds its strongest witness in the truth itself.